Hello, yes. Well, I wish I could wake up in the morning and think as clearly about issues of science and art as Martha Fleming. I really feel that, that really put a lot of points on the table which I can't possibly start to measure up to. So I suppose I'll have to resort to images and doing through being, but generally speaking, I don't like reading from papers. Again, having seen Martha, I thought maybe I ought to reconsider that. In fact, she got me into such a panic that I emailed our mission statement to my phone, which I'll now read out to you. This really is insecurity, isn't it? But the Arts Catalyst develops experimental art that practically and critically engages with science and technology, particularly science's cultural, political and social and political contexts, where possible through artists' direct engagement, that's the important bit, with its processes and technologies. So provoked by subjects and places that we as non-specialists, abbreviation marks, cannot do, access, understand or affect, particularly where they impact profoundly on our lives and futures. We work with artists to create contexts and opportunities for them to work at the frontiers of scientific investigation and application, including genetics, nuclear physics, space science, ecology, neuroscience and new materials, and in hard-to-access environments such as biotech labs, experimental reactors, space agencies, zero gravity and remote environments. We are interested in the new forms and techniques of artistic expression that these engagements can activate, and in the dialogue and cultural shifts that these interventions provoke within science, within art, and in society. Okay, so I'm not going to read anymore. So it's interesting, when I started looking at projects that we might show as case studies, it was extraordinary the number that seemed to be happening in Scotland. Here's a project which we did in collaboration with the University of the Highlands and Islands round about the start of the 2000s. This is the Maclab, which was a 6-month art and science project which we did with the very kind help of the Athol estate. It's situated in Perthshire, and they allowed us to erect this structure in a remote place. It was, in terms of connection with the outside world, the whole idea, the artist was a Slovenian artist called Marko Pelkan, and his notion was to put artists and scientists in a remote environment that was also connected to the outside world. So he had this notion of insulation and isolation, but connection. So here we had people, experts in ornithology, experts in soil analysis, working together with artists, sending rockets into the atmosphere, for one example, tracing hikers and tourists across the landscape, doing a number of other things. But the most important thing was they all lived in this pod together, 3 artists and 3 scientists, in bunks and in shifts. And I was down in the bothy, sort of coming up and cleaning the toilets and doing all the things that curators do. Here they are, enjoying a rare sunny afternoon in Perthshire. It rained. I saw more rain that summer than I've ever seen in my life. And that's the interior of the Maclab. Gives you some idea of the intense research environment. And one of the things I think nowadays it's called remediation. This notion of actually taking a group of people out of the immediate research environment and putting them in a station. Obviously, astronomers, Antarctic researchers all have that experience, but we wanted to try and introduce artists into that context, and various artists like Simon Faithfull, whose work I'm going to show you later, have been down to Antarctica, but also in the work we did, for example, at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, taking artists and scientists to Russia, to a very unfamiliar environment we found was a very creative stimulus for action. Now, this is an environment created by the group called London Fieldworks, but it's actually, we've just been involved in a project with them as part of our artists' air show where they've created this place called Outlandia, which overlooks Ben Nevis. It's a one-person artist's treehouse, which is constructed, and if anyone's interested in going and doing a residency in that structure. So basically we took a trip from the Highlands Institute of Contemporary Arts to this place, and I'll show you something from that in a moment. But let's just move away from that, because we're going to come back to London Fieldworks in a minute. Let's look at the Space Agency work. This, again, weirdly enough, is a Scottish circus performer called Morag Whiteman, who is in the interior of the Ilyushin MDK-70 aeroplane, which does parabolic flights. Now, we got into this. Actually, I'm going to digress a bit. This, the reason we ended up going to Russia and doing microgravity flights is because of this project, which we did with the biodynamics group, Professor Bob Schroeter and Dr. Nick Davey at Imperial College Biodynamics Group, with a dancer and choreographer called Kitsu Dubois, who had previously started researching dance in microgravity with the French Space Agency in the mid-90s. We encountered her and at that time, what was known as the SciArt Consortium had been set up, which with the Wellcome Trust being the leading participant in that, along with the British Council, the Gulbenkian Foundation, Arts Council England, and Nesta. And we applied for what is now the equivalent of Wellcome Large Arts Awards for what was then called SciArt. And I have to say, I think it's an interesting meme, this notion of SciArt, and it was a great publicity device, but I understand the Wellcome Trust doesn't actually use it anymore. And for me, it has not very good implications of a sort of hybrid mutant form of science and art. I believe in conversations between scientists and artists, not an attempt to try and wrestle them together. However, in those days we had SciArt, and SciArt gave us money to do this project, so for which we were very grateful, which was to work in this, actually this is inside the European Space Agency's parabolic aircraft. That's Kitsu Dubois, and the scientists from that's Nick Davey. And basically they are going to try an experiment where they use transcranial magnetic stimulation on the dancer in microgravity, which is an extremely complicated protocol, but we thought was kind of an interesting form of bringing together the notions of a dancer's control, choreography, and the current research that Nick Davey was doing at the time into paralysis using this technique. So we took a TMS unit into zero gravity as a science and art collaboration. And here we have another shot of that, the TMS being used with the dancer. So this, okay, so Nick got his data, and I think I'd like to talk about this problem about getting data and getting an artistic product, because quite often those two things can be a sort of an opposite path. And Kitsu got her artistic project, which is this. So this was actually not in the European Space Agency plane, because while they would take the experiment, they didn't want any dancing going on. So I, in 1999, was invited to Russia to take part in the first theatrical performance on a parabolic aircraft with some Slovenians called Dragan Živadino from the NSK group. So I actually experienced this environment for myself and realized it was possible to actually take Kitsu's project one step further, and we invited Kitsu and the Imperial researchers to continue the work in Russia. And this gives you a sense of what they're trying in terms of... Now, what Kitsu is also doing here is she's introduced some data into her artwork, so we can see here what, during the 30 seconds of the parabolic flight, what the actual gravitational, how they've measured the microgravity at the same time. And we continue to then get other artists to do it. This is actually the Otolith group, who last year were shortlisted for the Turner Prize and they made their first project in the zero gravity aeroplane, which is this is just a little shot of them making it. We've seen some of this, but I'll just show you a little bit of otolith.
She wrote, "At the Yuri Gagarin Training Center in Star City, I drank stolichnaya with the cosmonauts and asked them to fix a meeting with the general. We will try, they said, and toasted the mere splashdown. I don't think they ever did. I don't think they believed me. The new brigade don't have much contact with the old guard from the party, and Tereshkova was always a good communist." From Star City she wrote, "Dear Nanny, you told me you met her 2 times in your life. The first time in Moscow, 1972. You were there attending a conference in your capacity as president of the National Federation of Indian Women. Your friends in the movement called you the quiet revolutionary. Tereshkova came..."
So what this was an extract from a sort of Chris Marker-like exploration of science fiction of the future, where the descendants of the Indian woman you can hear speaking were unable to live any longer in Earth's gravity, and were exploring their origins through this zero gravity. So we had various open calls for the experience of microgravity, and I think I have to explain that until this point at the beginning of the 2000s, microgravity was a place that only astronaut and cosmonaut trainers went, and also scientific experiments were done. So in a sense we were fulfilling one of those calls to arms to open out new spaces. And when we had one of the calls was actually answered by a couple of people who said something very simple. They just wanted to sit in Oriental costume and fly a flying carpet. So I just make it happen. My embed's not working there. That's it. Getting 2 soundtracks at the same time. Interesting. Just give you a sense of when you try to do something rather difficult with microgravity. So, you know, you can't always predict what artists come up with, I think is the essential lesson here. Get the general idea. That you saw at the end was what you have in a parabolic flight. You have 30 seconds of weightlessness and then 30 seconds of double G. So the cosmonaut trainers are always pulling you to the ground, so that you're not right up there when the double G comes in. So this was so you see, this was done at the end of the 90s, not so long after 1989, and we realised this is an answer for sort of artist crash solutions in a way. We spent a lot of time trying to convince the European Space Agency, filling out a lot of forms, getting a lot of things, health and safety done, and then we found that $10,000 in a suitcase bought this plane. And so, and this crew, who we also had to give some extras. It's true. This was a small window in a time when we could do that. And again, we have a nice, interesting group here of the Russian cosmonaut trainers and the artists who we took out. And we actually, for this flight, we actually designed jumpsuits so that they looked as astronaut-style jumpsuits. Anyway, the European Space Agency ended up taking us quite seriously, and we competed with space agencies in industry companies, space industry companies, to get a contract with the European Space Agency, which is still ongoing, and we did a think tank and produced a report on the possibility of culture on the International Space Station. It's ongoing. So I think Martha's point about the lengthy the length of collaboration is very true of our collaboration with the European Space Agency. It seems to have been going on for 6 or 7 years now. They haven't decided quite how art can go to the International Space Station. So we're hoping something will come out of that eventually. Another project we did, which wasn't actually funded by the Wellcome with Sci-Art, but we was shown to a lot of audiences at the Roundhouse. We actually made an application which got very close to being funded. So I thought I'd show you this just to show what can come close to being funded. This is again by London Fieldworks, and this is a project with some geneticists at Leicester University, where they wanted to investigate the possibility of a sleep gene, and they're interested in the sleep gene doesn't exist, but it's humans are as I'm sure you all know, are the only mammals that don't hibernate, and I think scientists are interested to know why that should be. And so in Leicester, they're trying to see if there could be such a thing. They haven't found one yet as a sleep gene, but what we did with them was to do a live experiment with a registered nurse, with the DNA being registered on site by the team of scientists. And the two artists actually slept in these 2 capsules and were woken up to have blood samples taken from them and analysed on the spot. But this didn't happen in a lab, it happened in the basement of the Roundhouse in London.
Hi Joe.
So, and also mentioned was the Artist Air Show. This is something we did. And again, it becomes relevant to Scotland, but we did this first air show in Farnborough. This is the idea of artists developing things that would actually fly. This is Ben Blakeborough from Australia, who's built his own flying machine as an artist. And Simon Faithfull, who did this really rather successful project working with some meteorologists at Reading University, where he wanted to send a chair into space. So we were at Farnborough. It's a collaborative act with the audience. There's the weather balloon, and here is the chair. So basically this was sent up with a pendulum and a video camera and a live feed with GPS, and got to 30,000 meters. And now, after it launched, everyone went back into an aircraft hangar and watched the live feed on a big screen. So what we're hearing is the reaction of the audience having seen it go up. But you can see here, the chair is reaching the blackness of space before the balloon actually explodes, and you can see the circumference of the Earth. So, you know, it's getting as high up as some of Richard Branson's low Earth orbit flights will take place. A bit of health and safety note on this one. This was a chair about this size, but of course it wasn't a chair of this weight. The artist actually spent quite a lot of time constructing a very light chair that passed CAA regulations, so we were not being irresponsible. And this is actually, I spoke before about Simon's Antarctica version. This is his trip. This is him actually on Shackleton Island. This is an abandoned factory on Shackleton Island, which is now being been occupied by seals. And this was part of actually a show we did. Again, a Scottish connection. This was a show we did at Stills in Edinburgh called Ice Blink about Simon's Antarctic project. Most recently, last year, we did this work on Loch Ruthven as part of the Great Glen Artists Air Show with the Highland Institute of Contemporary Arts, HICA, which is up on, just south of Inverness. And this is GPS balloon work by Esther Pollack and Eva van Beckham from Poland and Holland, respectively. And this is a Brazilian artist who worked with a chemist at UCL, Dr. Andrea Seller, to basically on crystallography, but this is her doing a smoke piece on the moor up behind Loch Ruthven, and we had an audience of about 200 who'd made their way out there on a very wet day. This was last year. And after that we took them down the Great Glen to Outlandia. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this image. And we went in a 1940s bus and reenacted the Hollywood movie It Happened One Night. This is me singing, the artist and curator singing, the daring young man on the flying trapeze. And while we're in a kind of generally less serious mood, this is actually a work which is quite serious actually, that we're working on at the moment with Agnes Meyer-Brandis, a German artist. And we're interested in the notion of the analogue. We've been doing a lot of studying of Mars 500 and the Mars Desert Research Station. We're planning to do a big project called Republic of the Moon, which will open in fact Liverpool, but we're hoping to work with Dr. Kevin Fong and various other people to think about people living in isolated environments, and we're planning to build the first art and science lunar analogue. However, Agnes Meyer-Brandis is experimenting with what she calls her moon goose analogue, and she's bred some geese in Italy, 11 of them, from eggs, and that's Yuri being born. And here they are, they've been born, they've all been given the name of cosmonauts. These geese now quite large, they're living in a colony in Italy. They've been she's studied Lorenz, obviously, so she's imprinted as the goose mother. And here she is taking the goslings out for a walk. This is her spacesuit. And there she is trying to teach them to fly. It's rather difficult as a human. It's one of their habitats. This is all true, this is not a joke, this is actually happening. There she is again. Here's another attempt to try and make them fly. This is actually as part of an artist residency called Polinaria. And yet another attempt. Now, what we're planning to do with this is to actually set up a live streaming link between FACT in Liverpool and these geese in Italy. And that will be shown in December. An art project, really, rather than a science project. This is an outreach project by a couple of young artists called We Colonize the Moon. And what they've been basically doing is working actually with printmaking, and although this is a performance piece, with scratch and sniff, where they've been trying to get the smell of the moon. And they've actually had it tested on Buzz Aldrin, who said, of course, the moon doesn't smell of anything at all, but the spacesuits, when it came in from the surface of the Earth to the atmosphere of the lunar module, did have a smell, and this is the smell they've been trying to recreate. And that's the smell of actually the moon that's being wafted around her during this test. A couple of artists, I'm just showing you because I like their work. I saw it a few weeks ago. This is the recreation of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster. They tend to work on the strategy, it's an artist strategy of miniaturizing large-scale infrastructural situations. They also did this project, which is quite well known, called Nuage Vert, where they used an interactive laser to show the smoke coming out of a factory, first in Helsinki, then in an incinerator in Paris, which caused quite a lot of problems. But their strategy, and this is a strategy, we can talk about this, their strategy is to discuss and provoke discussion through action. They're called Hey Hey. Yeah, heyhey.org, that's one of them in Istanbul. Now, going back to the past, this is one of the biomedical projects we did called Clean Rooms. This is the work of Gina Czarnecki, who made this project called Silver's Altar, where she photographed a number of people naked, and then basically through touchpads you had the ability to show what it would be like if they had bred and caused different... I can't, it's a while back and I can't fully work out how it works. Does anybody here know Gina's work? Yep. And I just want to not be caught up, because there's so many scientists sitting here, on the detail of what she was actually doing. You know.
1 in 4 of the potential crushes had a mutation that would go badly wrong.
Yes.
So that was the key. It wasn't actually what people would look like if they were crossed. It was just about how longevity and continuity would work.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you again. Because Gina's worked here for some years, so I wanted to make sure on that. So this is actually a mixture of two projects. Neil White's project, in which people had to dress up in these bunny suits to enter a clean room, which he developed as an artwork, and then they're off to see Gina's work. And also in that show was Critical Art Ensemble. Here's Steve Kurtz, who I was having a drink with only last week. He was telling me about some of his new projects, very, very interesting, about brain research and what he regards as a new determinism around neurology and psychiatry. And I think that's hot off the press, that's a new CAE project. And here they are doing Genterra, which we presented to very large audiences in Gallery Oldham and the Natural History Museum in London in the Darwin Centre. It was quite amazing. They were prepared to show this. Genterra is a project where people could actually, members of the public could choose whether to genetically modify some bacteria, and they put it in a robot and did the GM. So to get people to think about GM in a very active way. So it was a Brechtian sort of attempt to put people in the position of the scientist who was making it. So it was at the point of all the controversy about GM. Unfortunately, Steve himself created a lot of controversy when, as many people know, his house was raided while he was doing another project on GM, free-range grain, and for a short while the FBI had thought they'd happened on a bioterrorist, as he had a home lab, and it had implications for amateur science around the world. In the end, he's finally, after a long legal battle, was acquitted. This is again from Genterra. And while, in fact, he was fighting that case, we did this project with him called Marching Plague, in which he recreated, using harmless materials, some of the biological experiments, biowarfare experiments that had taken place off the Isle of Lewis in Operation Cauldron. So essentially we went out in boats and recreated Operation Cauldron on the Isle of Lewis. Made a film that's been shown around the world, last at the Whitney Museum in New York, called Marching Plague. So we made that while he was, thankfully now, has been acquitted. One of the other strategies we do is to take artists into labs, and I was sort of thinking, oh, that's 60-day, that Martha referred to, exposure to fast-track exposure to biotech. Here we have the artist Franco B. learning how to create tissue culture, among other things, in the first Symbiotica workshop, which we did at King's College Hospital. This one is actually a recent, no, this is also from King's College Hospital about 5 years ago. It's the first Symbiotica laboratory we did. This is a recent one called Laboratory Life, which we did in Brighton. This was funded by the Wellcome Trust, and it took place at Lighthouse in Brighton. And here they are. It's quite an interesting project. So working with this scientist here, Janice, who's an expert on fruit flies. That's one of the artists. And here, what their aim was, what laboratory life was, they set up a number of art and science laboratories in an art centre, and they each had an aim, something they tried to try and do. And in this case, was to recreate the atmosphere of the moon Titan for fruit flies, using only vodka, a bicycle pump, and a few other home implements. So, and they did some interesting stuff with the flies. That's what they. I love that thing because that's what they do. I'm sure lots of people who work with fruit flies know this product. Again, more labs, and specifically for Sophia, this is Anne Bean, the performance artist who we took into the lab. Simon Gould, and then the work of Brandon Ballenger. I'll just pass the book we published about Brandon around. Brandon basically is interesting in this debate because he confounds a lot of people by really crossing the line. And again, this is a sort of, he issues a kind of a challenge in this respect because he's actually trying to find some scientific data as an artist, specifically on the mutation of amphibians, whether or not they are caused by anthropogenic climate change. So he's actually out there in the field doing work, but also with us at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, he worked with a large number of young people wading through ponds and getting samples of amphibians. And here we have some mutated amphibians. This is the image for which he's sort of quite well known. And again, we have another interesting debate. You see, this sort of looks almost like an artwork, but it's a life form. And the jury's out about whether or not this is caused by a form of parasitism or indeed climate change. But for me, the interesting point about it is he's crossed so far into the line of science practice of science that actually people in the art community won't give him grants as an artist anymore.
Two stools.
Yep. And another outreach project we did called East of Eden, which was funded by Creative Partnerships, where young people were actually creating environments for growing hydroponics. Can't say much about that, but I like the images. And there's the domes. This is done at a school in Kent. And this project, which is part of the Beacon, part of the Beacon-funded UCL beacons, which we did Space Sciences Laboratory at Mullard down in Surrey. And the artist Joanna Griffin had gone and talked to a number of satellite people who sent satellites into orbit, scientists specifically, and talked about their subject and their satellites and their launches, and then developed a series of narratives called Satellite Stories, and also building sort of little models of their satellites. And it was done as a family event. So where Mullard is, it's down in a village in Surrey, and a lot of people sort of think of it as the sort of weird rocket house on the hill. So we got all the people from the outlying villages to come. We had this evening event where we floated the satellites on the water in front of the house, and the scientists told stories about their satellites. So it was an attempt to sort of bring the science lab into its immediate community. So finally, and this is the thing I want to spend a little more time on now, but this is the last project I'm going to show you, because this is a live project that's actually happening at the moment. This was funded by Wellcome Trust Large Arts Awards, and we were very pleased that they funded it, not only because we wanted the money, but also because we thought it was actually a really good project. And we were very pleased that the Wellcome agreed with us on this. This is a scientist and artist collaboration between the artist Rachel Mary, who'd been in our previous interspecies project that was mentioned in the introduction, and she had been investigating the notion of Hollywood imagery and primates, and of course we've had so many of those movies this year with Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Project Nim, so this has happened absolutely perfectly. This is all done with the collaboration of the Badungo Trail at Edinburgh Zoo, the Royal Scottish Society, Zoological Society, and they very, very kindly have given us a lot of time to research and film. The main the scientist in this is Dr. Sarah Jane Vick, who's a primatologist and behavioural psychologist from the University of Stirling. Spent a lot of time working with her on facial recognition of these chimpanzees. Essentially, the project is to see if it's possible to make cinema for primates, to actually make movies that primates can actually find interesting, but also to work with a life scientist, or it's not a life scientist, with a face recognition engineer, face recognition expert, to see if it is possible to measure in some respect the animal's responses to the. So this is us working in the research pods in Edinburgh. This is Sarah Jane Vick, the scientist, sort of pointing downwards at one of the animals that's responding to the imagery. So Rachel's prepared. This is Rachel Mary. She's prepared the imagery, and we basically, the most successful data and results we got, and artistic results, and again we have a conflict between getting data and a good artistic project. At the end, the data is going to take a lot more time. We constructed a chimp-proof monitor, which I personally helped to wire up in the enclosure at Badungo, and here's a chimp sitting on it. And this is one of the animations we were showing them. So if I have time, I'd like to show you a short extract from Cinema for Primates, and that will be the end of my lecture. But I'll show you 5 minutes of Cinema for Primates, and then I'll take questions. This has been showing in Liverpool right now, and we'll be showing in London in 2 weeks' time. I have an invite card if anybody is in London at that time. So on the right hand side you see the material that's being shown the chimpanzees, and on the left hand side we have the reactions of the chimpanzees. So this is actually the old LA Zoo where she shot the material. I think hopefully most of you have worked out that this is not an actual chimp to the right here. It's actually a chimp actor who's played chimp roles for a very, very long time, for 15 years, with an animatronic radio-controlled animatronic face. It's very. I was convinced when I first saw that footage. So, just a point about the research pods in Budunga. As you know, it's not now legal or ethical indeed to experiment on on higher apes in Europe, and we basically at the Budunga Centre the chimps have a choice of being in the outside environment or in these research pods. The door is always open; they can leave so with psychology experiments, always technically voluntary. Although of course they can't leave the zoo, they can leave the research pods. That doesn't, of course, stop us putting a reward down, which we do occasionally. So we're showing them animations now. So we spent a lot of time in Budunga trying to do this. You kind of need to see it on two big screens as well to sort of get the full idea. Anyway, gives you the general idea. I was maybe going to try and show the full thing later on if we have time in the schedule. So yes, these are some other projects we did. Project again with animals, Kira O'Reilly, sleeping with, spending 3 days sleeping in the same environment as a pig. This is a project called Dark Places, where we we mapped various secret research institutes around southern England. This is a project we would like to do in the future called Airships and Rainforests. We're working with a group of artists in France who want to work with an engineer from Queen Mary University to devise an airship to look for as yet unidentified species of plants in the rainforests. Thank you. Okay.
Lots of interesting examples there. Any questions for Rob?
Is there consideration between the line of curiosity and animal cruelty when we do these experiments? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think zoos are very conflicted places. Spent a lot of time working in zoos, and normally I wouldn't go to a zoo for pleasure. I say they're very conflicted spaces because, of course, they have a very strong conservation agenda now. So Badungo is linked up to a conservation centre where these animals are under a lot of danger from poachers, this kind of thing. But yes, zoos exist probably because there's been an industry in buying and selling animals for all sorts of reasons, for pets, for acting, for mascots, Michael Jackson, all of that. And I think there are. I think zoos, to some extent, are having to sort of clear up the mess, but at the same time, they have to make money, so people, they have to have the animals on display. I think I personally feel that the subject of invasive or non-invasive animal experimentation is an issue that artists need to be out there and discussing. I wouldn't like to come up with a particular line on invasive or non-invasive animal experimentation here, except to say I think it's one of those things that shouldn't just be sort of shoved away in the corner. I think it should be out for general discussion, and I think we're responsible for what happens. All of us are responsible for what happens in our society, and I think those debates should be out there without intimidation or any of the things, So I wouldn't go along with. I wouldn't go along with either side. I'd like to see the debate out there.
Keep open to perspective.
That's
Absolutely. I think like when I watch that, I don't see the apes as apes. I see them as people, and I see us as some sort of alien or life form, being maybe curious and potentially, and it's debatable, but dangerously curious to these creatures. But at the same time, the perspective is if these apes weren't looked after in this way, perhaps they'd be dead by poachers. So there's all of that. But I guess the ultimate question is why do we do this? Why do we experiment on other animals? And why is it a curious drive in the human condition, or is there something that's going to create betterment for civilization in the world we live on?
Well, again, I can't comment on invasive or biomedical uses of animal experimentation, but in terms of psychology and in terms of these kind of psychological experiments that we were involved in, I would say that one of our arguments, particularly when we went to the funding panel, was that we will discover a lot about humans through doing this work, working with our closest relatives, and obviously we would take care that all the animals are being cared for well and are not distressed in any way, and in fact are enriched hopefully slightly by what we're up to. That's all I can say.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Just to understand the organisation, do you kind of broker the relationship between artists and scientists, or is it something that's already existing when you begin to work on projects, or both?
We tend to do the first. We tend to broker. When people come to us with projects, we tend to want to listen and give advice, but quite often it's beyond the point where we can successfully intervene quite often. For example, this project, actually, we had been working with another artist called Nicolas Primat, a French artist. He really is called Nicolas Primat, who'd been working in some research institutes in France, and he'd actually met the scientist here, Dr. Sarah Jane Vick, and then for various reasons that project couldn't continue. But this line of research has been going on for about 5 or 6 years now, and yes, the answer is we do tend to broker those relationships. That said, you know, if a team, an art science team, came to us and said, look, we can't think of a context within which we can do this, can you advise us? We might take a long look at the project and say, well, this is up our street, we think they need us. It's often the question we as an agency, which specialises in these kind of collaborations, is how are we needed? Why are we needed? You know, and sometimes the problem is that the Arts Council or someone will say, well, go to the Arts Catalyst. They'll know how to do it. And maybe we'll give you some money then. You know, and that's not quite how we like to enter a project. Yeah, just to say that, by the way, we are regularly funded by the Arts Council of England, as well as getting grants from Wellcome Large Arts Awards. So we survived the national profile exercise.
So the programme at this stage has sort of general questions, responses for everything we've heard this morning. I thought maybe I could just mention a few things that have sort of occurred to me during the course of the 4 presentations. One of the aims is not to teach the science, but to teach how to think about the science. Funding imbalances between arts and sciences. How can the success be assessed of science-art collaborations? Can that be enhanced by structural changes to universities, how we think about these things? Sci-art, an unsatisfactory hybrid, that was interesting. Let artists and scientists inhabit their space. Discuss and provoke through artistic action. Collecting data is difficult. Yes, scientists understand that a lot.
Well, I said collecting data is difficult within the context of having to produce dissemination at the same time to the public through art. That sometimes those things can be in conflict. I think Martha already pointed that out to some extent.
Well, and also it's very difficult for non-scientists to get access to data that might be treated in a different way than it is in the life sciences, for example. And this has to do with something we were talking about last night, which has to do with the shared, with the shared ethics structure, so that it might be possible for artists and humanities practitioners to have an arena in which they get ethical clearance to work on data or biobanked material that otherwise would not be accessible to them without that kind of clearance, which all scientists, of course, have to have.
So any general comments?
Yeah, just one quick one. So I have to ask is, how did it feel being in microgravity?
Quite disorientating. Yeah, it's something people should. I'd like to see as a more accessible environment for people to work in. I have been in there, and some people take it like a fish to water. Other people don't. I personally didn't find a need to go back into microgravity, but other people find it the most expensive drug in the world.
I just have a question about Arts Catalyst. Seeing as you seem to get some funding from the Wellcome Trust, are you under some obligations to deliver results to them from the pieces which are undertaken under the Arts Catalyst banner, or do they kind of just fund you with a view to the piece itself becoming sort of relevant?
Well, we have to have some quite strict and formal evaluation procedures, and that is still in process on the project I just saw you. I did see someone from the Wellcome Trust last. Is Anna Payton here? Jenny Payton, not Jenny Payton here. And she said it looked like that was the kind of project which we presented at our presentation, which was enough for me, because sometimes these things can deviate. But yeah, the process of evaluation, I think, with those large arts awards is quite rigorous, and we haven't done it yet. So, but yes, we do have to evaluate it. Yeah, but our main concern now is to get it disseminated to lots of audiences, which is to get lots of people to see it. And it's been a lot of people who are interested in showing it all over the world actually, so hopefully we'll be able to fulfill that part of it. In terms of the data, well, you know, it's going to be ongoing. That would be ongoing, possibly even for another project. But we're not actually required to provide scientific data as part of an arts award. Yeah, no.
So it was something that Mike, I think brought up in his presentation. It's very important for scientists. We're continually having to demonstrate what the likely outcome of our work is, and in a completely different way, I would imagine. It's important for artists to be able to assess how important, how effective whatever they're doing is, and sometimes I think again Martha brought this up, in a interdisciplinary approach, sometimes finding the correct measures of how successful you've been are difficult, and that can provide really quite a barrier to people wanting to be involved in that sort of thing, and for people to support it.
Yeah, I also ought to just mention the airshow project I showed was funded by the Scottish Arts Council, now Creative Scotland, just while we're talking funders.